Well, welcome again to Flame of Truth. I'm Dan Smith. I'm the senior pastor down at Garden Grove Church in Orange County in California. And just excited today to have you be with us and hope that you'll spend the next little bit with us as we look at the whole issue of Christianity and culture, and when they meet in the middle, how do we handle all that? So, but first we're going to have special music at the group that I have not heard before. So I'm just as excited as you to hear a group called S&G. They're actually from Latvia, and they're going to sing a song called Adore.
From this moment, you open up my eyes. I see the world in a different light. From that dawn, it's true the setting sun. I am overwhelmed by all that you have done. Jesus, I adore you. Adore. Jesus, I adore you. And I lay my life before you, oh Lord. There's the union of two becoming one. Deep inside my heart, I know that I belong. You have given everything to me. Believe that I can do, it's give it back to you. And all I am and never will be is for you, Lord. And everything within me cries, adore, adore. Jesus, I adore you. Adore. Jesus, I adore you. And I lay my life before you, oh Lord.
Wow, wasn't that nice? I'm going to have them in my church, and I hope that we have them here again on Flame of Truth. Anyway, welcome again. And the title today is The World, Love It or Leave It, from a book by Roger Dudley many years ago. Anyway, someone, while I was back at our world headquarters meeting a week ago, gave me a little joke. He said there's an old man who's lost his wife. So he had to move. He got lonely, moved into an assisted living facility where you have your own space, but you go and eat together with a group. So every meal, they assigned him to a table, and here was a group, and then across the other end was a nice-looking widow. So after about 3 days of looking at her, he finally went on the fourth day and said to her, would you marry me? And she says, yes. So he goes back to his room. He's just thrilled. But as he gets into the night, he begins to wonder, what did she really say? He's not sure. Did she say yes or no? All night long, he tossed and turned, trying to remember what she said. Finally, early in the morning, he calls her up and he says, I'm so sorry to wake you early in the morning, but I just have to know, last night I asked you to marry me, but did you say yes or no? And she says, I'm so glad you called, because I knew I had promised somebody, but I couldn't remember who it was. So here are two people who one part of their lives is still very normal, still falling in love, still attracted to another person, but another part has gotten old and has gradually lost touch with reality. And there are those who think that happens when you're in a church. You're in the world and you're fully connected to reality, and then you become part of the church and you get baptized, and you begin to disconnect from the world, and no longer are you watching the movies or reading the books or listening to the music. You change all your friends, and then slowly over time you become disconnected and out of touch with the real world and the reality that is out there. I grew up in a family and a tradition, of course, that didn't go to movies at all. And you know, if we were on an airplane and there were 6 of us, filled the whole row, flying, we were missionaries, so we'd be flying over the ocean, and they'd show a movie, and my mother would make sure none of us were looking. We had to keep our head down and just tune that out. Even when we went to a movie that was not in a theater, like at a school or somewhere, if there was even anything that didn't agree with our values, someone smoking or drinking, we would all have to file out. My mother did not want any of us to be contaminated by the world. Well, I was on a plane one time flying over to do a week of prayer, I think in Philippines or somewhere. And my mother's not on the plane anymore, and I'm in my 50s, so I began to watch a movie called Wedding Crashers. No idea what it was, but two young guys keep crashing weddings that they're not invited to, and all these young girls want to be married and are feeling a little vulnerable, and so they were vulnerable, and then they would take them and sleep with them. And there are little moments of nudity and sexuality and language in this. So I would turn off quickly, and then after a while I would hope that area would be over, and I would go back and turn it on. There would be another episode of it. It was filled with things that are not part of my values. And when the movie was finally over, and I'm a couple hours away from walking off the plane and walking into a chapel to speak to a couple thousand young people about God and living a moral life for God, and I realized my soul had been stained. There was a dirty feel in my soul, and I just felt bad that I had spent 2 hours off and on with this movie. Well, I came back to church in my place, and I spoke about it and just talked about this concern. And a couple of my young pastors came up to me afterwards and they said, Pastor Dan, you need to be careful. Most everybody we know has watched that movie and thought it was a terrific movie. And if you're not careful, if you put it down, they will tune you out as a college pastor speaking to young people. Well, now what am I supposed to do? Then I finally said, are you going to show it to your daughter? Well, no. Why not? What's different? Well, that's different. My daughter. Not different from the college kids. I said, all those college girls are somebody's daughter. How do you find the line between Christ and culture? Where are we safe and where does it wander into being in the world? And we have to be careful. 1 John 2:15 says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. It's one of the most difficult passages in the Bible. You can be friends with the world or friends with God, but you can't be both, according to that text. What's the world? This is the hard question. Where is the line between Christ and the world? What do you do when Christ and culture meet? If we disconnect from the world, then we lose touch with reality. If we get into the world, then we lose our relationship with God. How do you handle this? When someone says so-and-so left the church and went back out into the world, what do we mean? They began to what? Watch movies and listen to rock music? They began to be sexually active? They began to what? Dancing, jewelry, eating too much ice cream? I mean what? What does the world mean here? My brothers and I grew up in a tradition of no rock music, no jazz. We're all pastors, or at least we were until recently. One's a teacher now. We were all down in New Orleans, 25 years ago, 1985. And we were having, again, our World Church headquarters called our General Conference Session. We've been going to meetings all day, every day. Finally, it's Saturday night, and we wanted to go hear the music, what is called Preservation Hall Jazz Band. It's a simple little place, and just a few old black men usually have a little combo, and they're playing very old Dixie and Wanna Go Marching, Saints Go Marching In kind of songs. But we weren't sure if this was sort of acceptable for pastors to be going to, and so we sort of snuck down there and got in line, hoped that no one would see us. We went in, we had a wonderful 30, 40 minutes in there. Then on the way out, we came outside, and here were another group of our fellow Adventist pastors who we knew walking on the way to get in. So evidently they thought it was okay too. Were we in the world? Were we loving the world and then love of the Father was not with us? How do you decide? Well, Roger Dudley, he used to teach at the seminary and was a youth pastor for many years. I think he's probably retired now. Wrote a book called The World, Love It or Leave It. And he divided this whole issue into 3 areas. The book he got it from is called The Christ and Culture by Reinhold Niebuhr. And he divided it into 5. One area he calls the culture rejecting approach, where we need to stay away from the world. We need to be not contaminated by the world, and so we reject the world. Stay away, stay separate from them. No rock music, no movies, no dancing, no friends in the world. Don't be unequally yoked with anybody. Just stay away from the rest of the world. We like to build schools with walls and fences around them. I grew up on what they called compounds, where we would be in the mission field and then have a wall around us to keep the world out there. I went to college at a place up on top of a hill. We always laugh about it. You had to drive 100 miles in order to find any sin, because parents want to keep their kids safe and uncontaminated from the world. Try not to work in a secular place. Try to work in the church if you can, or with other Christians, so you won't have to listen to language or jokes. Keep the world away. And there's many verses that support this particular approach. I'll just bring 3 or 4 quickly. John 18:36, my kingdom is not of this world. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 17, be separate, come out from them. Revelation 18:4, come out from Babylon. That whole idea. And then 2 Corinthians 6:14, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And there's many more. And the key songs, of course, would be, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. The world behind me, the cross before me. Well, on the other end, he suggests there is the culture affirming, culture affirming option. This group says, no, there is still an awful lot of good in the world, even though there is a fall. All the great pleasures that God built into the world are still there, and it's in nature, and it's in our music, and in movies, and in literature, and novels, and in sports, and in travel. And we should not cheat ourselves of all of these. These are gifts from God, and we should embrace the world and keep connected to the world. And if we're not in the world, how can we reach the world? If we're so out of touch with reality, with what they're reading and what they're watching and what they are living, we're going to be on another planet compared to them. So we need to stay in the real world. And of course, there are some verses for that. The Bible says, Matthew 24, verse 38, eat, drink, and be merry. 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23, when I'm in Rome, do as the Romans do, so that you can win some. You have to stay connected to their level and their world. And of course, the great text for John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Jesus did not just stay in heaven where it is safe and pure and uncontaminated, and then just shout out or send out his instructions by internet on what you have to do to come to heaven. He comes down and gets right into our world. We call it the incarnation. Right into our world, and not just into our world, but he went and hung out with the lowest levels of our world, with prostitutes and with people who were drinking and the tax collectors, right there with them. Infuriated the religious leaders of the church. Culture affirming. All right. And the key song for that would be, "This is my Father's world." My Father's world. Embrace it. Soak up all the pleasures. You only live once. Grab the gusto and experience life in the real world. God didn't mean for us to wait until He comes for us to begin to live. Begin to live now and enjoy the world, the best of the world. In the middle, He called culture transforming, culture redeeming, where we're still in the world. We don't want to exit from the world and escape and separate and draw walls around us. There's a lot of world still there to enjoy. God created the world. It was good. Yes, it's some fallenness, but there's still an awful lot of good. Don't cheat yourself out of the best movies and literature and sports and travel and people. And we have to live in the real world, but don't be of the world. John 17 says, verses 14 to 18. In the world, but not of the world. Romans 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. We don't want to be transformed by the world. We want to do the transforming. And we want to be the ones who take the world as it is and fight to change it, but we still experience the best of it. And then we try to filter out those areas so that we don't compromise our values. And so in the world, but not of the world. And somehow, maybe the kids are right, that you can watch the movies or read the books or listen to the music and somehow filter out the sex and the violence and those things that aren't consistent with our values. We don't have to do those things. We can filter them out and keep our minds and our hearts pure. So you don't have to cut out all the movies and music and novels and all the rest of life. Culture transforming. And of course, Jesus was able to do this. Jesus was able to come down and be so full of God that He was able to go anywhere and do anything, and nothing came through to contaminate or stain His soul in any way, and kept His heart absolutely perfect. So if Jesus is able to do it, then we can do it. He could love prostitutes without sleeping with them. He could hang out with the drinkers and not get drunk or drink with them. And so it says in Ephesians 6, we can put on the whole armor of God, and we can quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Put on the whole armor and quench all the fiery darts. So let's try. What shall we do? All right, a little illustration just from this last week as I taped this. We came back from the World Headquarters meetings and went up to go whitewater rafting in the American River out from Sacramento here in California. I had done a lot of rafting when I was young, but I hadn't had a chance to do it for a while. My sons were young, but they're late teens now. So two families, we went down the river. I was a little bit sick, but anyway, we had a great time. Gorgeous. I just remembered how much fun whitewater rafting can be. And if you can go to YouTube and watch the American River, the tunnel chute, class 5, you get down in the boat and just to go through all this frothy white water, it's incredible. And the boys came out, yes, that's whitewater rafting. Except at the end of the second day, I fell out. We got up on a rock and I began to tip out, and then my wife was on the other side. She fell out and landed on me, and I went under the water. I came out under the boat. And so here, get that boat off of me. And I'm fighting for air, and finally was able to get the back of the boat and push it off of me, and I came up and got some air. But rather than being able to follow the boat, I was caught in what they call an eddy, and got swirled back towards the rapids. I was scared. Finally, I was able to swim out of the eddy and get over to the shore. And now the boat is way down the river. And I had a choice to try to get back in the water and somehow fight that eddy, or climb over the rocks on this wall and try to get down. Well, I chose the rocks. Maybe it wasn't the right choice. I was soaking wet, so it's slippery. Tried to get a handhold, knowing that if I missed one handhold, I was going to bounce down that rock and probably die. And I ended up 30, 40 feet up in Poison Oak, fighting for every handhold, trying to not slip and come down. Well, obviously I made it, and I'm thankful for that. But I've still been having nightmares about being up above that rock and looking down and realizing that if I wasn't really careful, I was in terrible trouble. Well, here's the point. Should we not whitewater rapid because of the risk that we might fall? No. Most of us would not say that. just because there's a risk of some does not mean that we should deprive ourselves of this incredible fun. We had so much fun. I would do it again tomorrow. I would just hold on a little better next time. We cannot afford to cheat ourselves of that kind of pleasure. Just be careful, because there is a risk that you can fall out of the boat and get sucked under the boat and have the air sucked out of your soul. And so be careful. But go out into the world and experience the best of the world that is still there. Just be careful that you don't get sucked away. Well, I want to look quickly at the book of Acts and chapter 17. We have to go very quickly now. Paul goes down into Athens. They've had their big meeting, Acts 15, in Jerusalem. Now he goes in Acts 17, and they invite him to come out to Mars Hill. I've been there, climbed all over it one Sabbath when I was a young boy. We were missionaries, traveled through. So here's Mars Hill, and the philosophers come out, and it says, Paul says to them, Acts 17, starting with verse 22 and so on, I've been walking your streets. I've been walking the streets of it. He was not afraid. And he says, I've been seeing your gods. I've seen all the altars. You're very religious. But I've seen one altar that was to the unknown God. I want to tell you about him. My point is that, number one, no fear. Paul is not afraid. He's not afraid to walk in the streets of the real world. He can leave Jerusalem and go into Athens and walk the streets among all of their gods. He's not afraid. He's got a good education. He knows he can keep up with them. He's equal to their best and the brightest. And he is so sure of his beliefs that he can take them on and stand firm with what he believes. He is not afraid. He knows all their literature. He knows their philosophy. He knows their poets. He quotes their poets and brings them into the Bible. Not afraid. And so we don't need to be afraid. We can know the literature and the music and the things of our world, so we can stay in touch with people and we can meet them at their level and start with their gods and then lead people to the true God. So number one, we're not afraid. Number two, no other gods. He is very clear. It says he was troubled by all the idols that he saw. He was not having these gods begin to look good to him. He knew who his God was. The God in him we live and move and have our being. Acts 17:28. The God who by his mouth spoke everything. 17 verse 24. God created it all by speaking. He knew who his God was. You are safe to walk the streets of the real world and to engage in the culture and the literature of our world as long as you are crystal clear who the true God is. And you are not beginning to have these gods begin to look good to you. And so as long as you know in your heart there were no other gods, seek ye first the kingdom of God, Matthew 6 verse 33. Let's be very clear who the real God is. Then you are safe to be in the real world. So you have to be very, very careful what your beliefs are. But if you begin to have the gods of this world begin to look good to you, and the true God is boring, it's hard to get up to go to church, you have a hard time wanting to read the Bible compared to the video games or movies or literature or whatever else, then that's a tip-off that maybe you've gone too far into the culture of the world and you need to get back to the Bible and tighten up on the boundaries of your culture. And then number three, it's not far. It's not far. Acts 17 verse 27. God did this so that people would seek him and find him, though he is not far from every one of us. It all depends on your relationship. If God is not far to you, if you have a relationship with God, it was safe for Paul to go there because he spent 3 years hammering out his relationship with Christ in the desert. It was safe for Jesus to walk and be with all the prostitutes and drunkards and tax collectors because every morning he got up early and filled his soul with God. If you have a relationship with God, then you're safe to work out into the real world and to watch its movies and listen to its music and work in the secular world with people all around you because you have put in the filters. You are so full of Christ and have the values of Christ into your mind, and you now, by beholding, have become changed, that nothing can get through. You are bulletproof. You have the whole armor of God so that you quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. And that is when you are safe to be with Christ. But you have to know yourself. You have to know who you are. When we went rafting, we didn't start out with class 5 rapids. We started with one, just a little ripples, boring. My boys were bored. I was bored. But we got better and better, and then class 3, and then class 4, class 5. But when we got to class 6, we got out of the boat. We were not able to handle that. Only the guides could handle that. The 12-foot waterfall. You can see it on the web. And so you have to know where your relationship with Christ and your maturity can handle that level of culture, and when you need to say, I think I need to get out of the boat and get out of this river of culture. You have to decide and know your relationship with God, and then go fill your life with God some more. Well, let's finish with one quick point. We just had our World Church Headquarters meeting, and our new president spoke. Powerful sermon last week, Elder Ted Wilson. And we respect him and the leaders of our church. He is now, we call him the anointed leader. I don't know if God chose him or not. I wasn't there. I don't know. But now he's our leader. We accept our leaders of our church. But people are asking all these questions. Who will he be? What will he do with our church? Where will he lead our church? And I just said to my church this week, there are two parts of Acts. There's Acts 15. There is Jerusalem, where you make decisions for the world church. But there's also the Mars Hills of Acts 17, where our religion has to go out into the real world, where Christ meets the culture. And we have to then make the religion, our beliefs, play out, where people are coming to check us out. And is your religion really going to stand? And is it going to make sense? And is it live in the real world, not disconnected from reality? And so we have to hold on to both. We have Jerusalem and we have Mars Hills. My church is one Mars Hill. Your church is a Mars Hill. You are a Mars Hill, where you are playing out our religion, where we are living it out in the real world. And our church is the best of Jerusalem and the best of Mars Hills. And sometimes our theology comes from Jerusalem to Mars Hills. Sometimes it goes back the other way. But stay with Christ, stay in the church, be a place where the religion is playing out. Stay pure with Christ, no other gods, not far. You have a relationship with Christ, so God can assign you anywhere in the world. God bless you all.